last but not least, Bruce, co-founder of the Good Food Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm delighted to be here and appreciate you inviting me. I'm going to say a couple of things that are controversial. I have a feeling on the basis of how that last presentation closed out, as well as some of the comments in the chat. But let me start by reiterating a couple of things that Noah talked about, the harms of industrial animal agriculture. I think it's important to recognize that the climate impact of food is 1/3 of global adverse climate change. And to date, nobody has come up with a reasonable solution that scales. You talk about food waste, it requires a lot of people. You talk about regenerative agriculture, it requires that consumers pay more and that ranchers be trained. All of the food solutions that exist have trouble scaling, which makes them subpar climate solutions. Two other things that Noah nodded at with regard to the problems of industrial animal agriculture. One of them is pandemic risk, which I think we don't talk about nearly as much as we should. In July, the United Nations Environment Program listed the 7 most likely causes of the next pandemic. The first one was eating meat, was just increased meat production globally. The second one was intensification of animal agriculture. The 7th one was climate. Third was interaction with wildlife. So the first 2 are growing meat production. The 7th is climate, which is obviously accelerated by meat production. And it's a big problem. And then antibiotic resistance, which I'll talk about just a little bit more in a minute, but just to lay the groundwork. The UK government has said the threat to the human race from antibiotic resistance is greater than the threat from climate change. And 70 to 80% of all antibiotics produced globally are fed to farm animals. And yet per capita meat consumption, despite what we oftentimes hear, I've been working on industrial animal agriculture for more than 30 years. Every single year you hear millennials care about the environment, millennials care about their health, people are eating less meat. Every single year the polls come out, people are eating less meat. Literally for 30 years, it's been a steady trajectory like this of increased meat consumption per capita in the United States. So the place where people understand these issues the most, 2019 was the highest per capita meat consumption in recorded history in the United States. Globally, it is skyrocketing. This is globe on fire situation, basically, that we're dealing with. And if we try to solve every single problem at the same time, if we try to make alternatives to industrial animal agriculture absolutely perfect, we are relegating the people who can least adapt to climate change to absolute misery. Look what's happening in India right now. Look what's happening in Brazil right now. If we make decisions to try to make the products perfect and they cause the products to not taste as good or to cost more, we are essentially thumbing our noses at the global poor and saying, bring on the next pandemic, bring on the end of modern medicine, which is what comes with antibiotic resistance, as well as bring on climate change. And the people who have done the least to contribute to it end up suffering the most. So at the Good Food Institute, what we think the solution is we need to figure out how to give consumers everything that they like about meat, but we can do it with plants. So meat is made up of lipids, aminos, minerals, and water. Plants are also made up of lipids, aminos, minerals, and water. Up until 10 years ago, up until the advent of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, the sort of vegetarian market, the ersatz meats, the vegetarian market, it was for people who wanted to pay more or who were willing to pay more, and for people who were vegetarian or they were flexitarian and they were willing to sacrifice on taste. The brainstorm of Impossible and Beyond is no, you don't have to sacrifice on taste. And because the products are so much more efficient, as they scale up, they can actually cost less. So they can taste the same or better, and they can cost the same or less. And I'm guessing we have a disproportionately vegetarian audience coming to this conference. I've been vegan for 33 years, but I will tell you that a lot of people really like to eat meat, which is why meat consumption just keeps going up. even in the United States and certainly globally. We can solve that too. We can cultivate meat directly from cells. It uses 1/20th the amount of land as beef. It causes less than 1/10 of the adverse climate impact of beef. So this is a double climate whammy. It both decreases direct emissions and it frees up so much land. That land can be used for regenerative agriculture. That land can be used for rewilding. That land decreases adverse impact on forests. That land takes all of the feed crop cultivation, which is monocropped, which is pesticides and herbicides. So it solves all of the problems that we're trying to solve by making the products perfect, but it doesn't require that consumers pay more, and it doesn't require that consumers sacrifice on taste. This is literally the one food and ag solution that Bill Gates is excited about, because it's the one solution that is analogous to renewable energy. It's the one thing. So GFI operates in Singapore and Israel. We operate in India, Israel, Brazil, Europe, Asia Pacific, and the US. But we're not in Israel because we care what the Israelis eat, and we're not in Singapore because we care what the Singaporeans eat. We're in those places because they are technologically advanced and they have governments that want to fund this sort of science. Science in Israel scales globally. This is the only food solution where that's true. Science in Singapore and Israel or at UC Davis, it scales globally. And there's the battle cry of the climate community, which is electrify everything. This is essentially electrifying meat. It removes the methane from ruminant digestion. It removes the nitrous oxide from manure decomposition. It concentrates all of the energy use in the factory. And consequently, it has a fraction of the climate impact, uses a fraction of the land, and it drops the likelihood of your food causing the next pandemic from significant, one of the top, 3 of the top 7 causes, to 0. Drops the likelihood that your food is going to cause the end of modern medicine, so through no more antibiotic resistance, from significant to 0. So this is the single-minded focus of the Good Food Institute. We think the world is on fire. We think there are 3 major issues with the way that we produce meat now. Right now, plant-based meat is less than 1% by volume of sales, even in the United States. It's just north of 2% by dollar sales. Globally, it's even smaller than that. If we keep focusing on this stuff needs to be absolutely perfect and solve every single problem at the same time, we are going to be doomed to fail. The world is on fire. Plant-based meat and cultivated meat are how we put it out. And at GFI, our focus is on convincing governments and the broader NGO community that we should be supporting open access research and development for plant-based and cultivated meat. We should be incentivizing private sector R&D as well as manufacturing and infrastructure buildup. And we just had a pretty big success. What we had been focused on was creating something to align with the clean energy ministerial. We wanted that for food. That's something that we've been working with members of Congress on. That's something that we have been petitioning the Kerry administration for. That's something that all of our international offices have been focused on. And probably a lot of people on this call know that on Friday, the UAE, with which GFI had been working, and the United States announced the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, which is the first time there's been something like that. And it allows an umbrella for international cooperation to talk about agriculture's adverse impact on the climate, and allows us to insert the concept of alternative proteins, the concept of making meat in a way that is better, so that consumers, just like renewable energy, the idea of solar and electric vehicles and wind is that this should be how we all power our lives, and we need to get rid of the green premium. In other words, we need to make them equally convenient and less expensive. Exact same thing with meat. If we keep going person by person by person, trying to convince people to change their diets, that's literally what we've been doing for 50 years. We need to just change the meat, and it solves these colossal problems. So that's my suggestion, that's my plea. And I will drop how you can find out more about GFI, as well as where I am on Twitter for anybody who wants to engage. So I'm happy to spend about 5 minutes answering questions if that's of interest to people. Happy to engage later as well.
Wow, thank you. Really fascinating. It's always so hopeful to know that there are solutions available. And I think that's a big reason why we all come together here. Speaking of solutions, though, this question came up in our feed. What about food waste? I mean, this is something we haven't touched on in our conversation today with ag tech. And we do have so many technological solutions and innovations. Any thoughts on food waste, though?
Yeah, and if you look at Project Drawdown, you look at their solutions wheel, and food waste for keeping climate under 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050, as well as under 2 degrees Celsius. The shift that I spent my presentation talking about is in the top 4 to 6. And food waste is also in the top 4 to 6, which makes it insane that the global community has not been talking about food until now, and the focus has really been on clean energy. I mean, even just what I was talking about, that sort of a shift would do more for climate mitigation. I think it's like 14 times more than a complete shift to electric vehicles exclusively. Food waste is similar. Food waste is harder than the shift to plant-based and cultivated meat. It does require a lot of different actors to do a lot of different things. But it is a major, major contributor. And there are some ideas on the Project Drawdown website, which I would direct people to.
Yeah, I agree. Investors, though, should be looking at this as well. I mean, this is an economic opportunity, right? Both in terms of philanthropic capital and for-profit capital. Is that something that the Good Food Institute speaks to or can help investors find the right opportunities?
Yeah, we have an entire investor section on our website. So if you go to gfi.org and click on the industry, so we have policy, industry, and science. And if you click on industry, we produce a startup manual for entrepreneurs, which has been gotten multiple awards. We also have investor resources. Every year we do state of the industry for plant-based meat, for cultivated meat, and for plant-based all products, for cultivated meat, and for both whole biomass and precision fermentation. So on May 10th, we'll be releasing the resources for 2020, which lists all of the most successful companies, all of the most active investors. And on our website, we have a wide host of resources, both on the entrepreneur side and on the investor side. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if we keep thinking about plant-based meat and cultivated meat as something that should stay niche, which is how a lot of people, think about it. They think it needs to be exclusively organic. They think it needs to be exclusively, quinoa or these really expensive grains. They decry using soy or they decry using wheat. That guarantees that it stays niche. The reason Beyond and Impossible have been so successful, the reason the cultivated meat companies have been so successful is that their eyes are on that $1.7 trillion meat market, not the tiny fraction of that is people who are willing to sacrifice on taste and price. So lots more information about that concept on the gfi.org website.
Wow. How soon will we be seeing cultivated meat in our markets, whether it's Whole Food or,
Yeah, we just released a techno-economic analysis and a life cycle analysis of cultivated meat. We worked with the Singapore government, their Agency for Science, Technology, and Research, as well as 15 companies to try to map out what their trajectory might look like. So if you go to the gfi.org website or just Google gfi.org TEA, you can read about what it looks like, but at a very limited scale in the next few years. It's for sale in a couple of places in Singapore right now. Multiple companies have announced that they will have pilot facilities fairly soon. Remember that Impossible Foods, they launched in 2016 in 2 restaurants, Jardiniere in San Francisco and Momofuku in New York City. I think you'll see stuff like that with cultivated meat in the fairly near future. And then we really need to bring the planet is on fire message to legislators and say, look, you're putting billions of dollars into ag subsidies right now. You're putting tens of billions of dollars into renewable energy subsidies right now. You need to make sure that this industry wins, both because it solves all the problems we were talking about, but also because, it was interesting, the American Jobs Plan from the Biden administration, it says jobs, infrastructure, and it says out-innovate China. We're going all in on out-innovate China because, as people here probably know, but a lot of people don't, China brought down the price of solar panels, and now the vast majority of solar panels are made in China. China has right now 93 gigafactories for lithium-ion batteries. The US has 4. In 10 years, China's going to have 140 batteries for electric cars. The US is going to have 10. So our message to, we're basically trying to create something like the space race, but focused on reimagining meat and saying, look, unless you want all of the meat to be made in China in the same way that solar panels and lithium-ion batteries are, the US government needs to go all in on this. If we win making that argument, it can happen pretty fast.